Ladies and gentlemen, every story of extraordinary achievement begins with the simplest of origins. It begins not in boardrooms lined with polished oak tables, nor in private jets flying across continents, but in the quiet corners of childhood, where dreams are raw, uncertain, and often dismissed as naive. The story of a billionaire is not born in the counting of wealth, but in the courage to imagine a life far greater than the one handed to them at birth. I want you, as you listen to this journey, to imagine the earliest days of any successful individual. Picture the modest neighborhoods of Birmingham, Manchester, or perhaps the rolling hills of Yorkshire. Perhaps a council estate where walls were thin, opportunity scarce, and aspirations often suffocated by the practical demands of survival. It is here, in such unassuming beginnings, that the seed of greatness was sown. The first glimpse of dreaming. As children, we all encounter the same limitations. We don't choose the families we reborn into, we don't design the schools we attend, and we certainly don't dictate the economic realities that govern our upbringing. But what defines the extraordinary child is not their circumstance, but their perception of it. Consider a boy who looked out of his small bedroom window onto the grey streets of London. Around him were working-class families who toiled day and night, whose only ambition was to keep food on the table and the light switched on. But within this boy, a restlessness stirred. He saw the worn-out shoes of his father and the tired eyes of his mother, and rather than resign himself to the same fate, he whispered quietly to himself, "This cannot be all there is." That whisper, my friends, is the birthplace of transformation. That whisper is the first moment where the ordinary turns extraordinary. The weight of limitations. In those early years, resources were painfully scarce. Education was limited not by curiosity, but by financial restraint. He wore hand-me-down uniforms, shared second-hand books, and carried with him the silent embarrassment of poverty. Yet, what he lacked in possessions, he compensated with imagination. And isn't that the first lesson for all of us? That circumstances may define the environment we grow up in, but they must never define the limits of our dreams. When I speak to young professionals today, I tell them this: you are not the sum of what you have inherited. You are the architect of what you can create. Our protagonist, at the tender age of 9, embodied this principle instinctively. He didn't have mentors at the time, he didn't have financial security, but what he had was curiosity, and that was enough to plant the first seed of change. The spark of curiosity. He found his sanctuary in the local library. While others his age may have spent afternoons chasing footballs in the park, he was chasing ideas through the aisles of dusty shelves. Economics, science, biographies of inventors and leaders, these became his companions. Books, for him, were not mere pages, they were escape routes. They were windows into worlds where possibilities were limitless. He read about men and women who dared to dream, who stumbled, who failed, but who eventually carved their names into history. And here lies a crucial lesson: exposure to ideas creates the hunger for more. Without exposure, a child believes that their world is the entirety of existence. But once they encounter new paradigms, new visions of what life can be, the horizon widens, and they begin to ask themselves, why not me? Early encounters with doubt. Yet, let us not romanticize this journey. Every child who dares to dream encounters opposition, sometimes from peers, sometimes from teachers, and tragically, sometimes from family. Our young dreamer was often told, "Don't aim too high, or you will only end up disappointed." And this is where many lives are quietly extinguished, not by failure, but by doubt. Doubt planted in the mind of a child can be as heavy as any chain. It tells them to keep their heads down, to remain within the lines, to avoid standing out. But this boy, though he heard those voices, never allowed them to silence the quiet conviction growing within. He began to understand that doubt was not truth, it was fear, disguised as advice. The role of work ethic. At just 11 years old, he began odd jobs, delivering newspapers before school, washing cars at weekends, and stacking shelves at the local shop. These were not glamorous undertakings. He would wake in the damp cold of English mornings, his breath visible in the frosty air, his fingers numb as he pushed newspapers through letterboxes. Yet, rather than despise this labor, he embraced it. Why? Because it was teaching him something invaluable. That effort compounds, that small beginnings create big habits. It was here that he learnt discipline is the bridge between dreams and reality. The hidden power of adversity. Now, allow me to pause and share a perspective. As an HR professional, I often hear individuals complain of hardship as though it were a curse. But in the story of every billionaire, hardship was never a curse, it was a catalyst. Poverty teaches you the value of money. Struggle teaches you the value of resilience. Rejection teaches you the value of persistence. Every difficulty is not an obstacle, it is a teacher. Our young dreamer, unknowingly, was being schooled by adversity itself. Each rejection, each challenge, each limitation was strengthening his resolve. The quiet promise to himself. One evening, as he sat by a small desk under the dim glow of a flickering lamp, he wrote in a tattered notebook a simple line. One day, I will build a life where my family never has to choose between heating and eating. This was not an extravagant goal. This was not a boastful declaration. It was a quiet promise, personal, private, sacred. And often, my friends, the most powerful goals are not shouted from rooftops but whispered in silence. That promise became the anchor of his journey. Whenever he faced discouragement, he returned to it. Whenever he felt the weight of failure, he reread it. That single sentence was not just a goal, it was his identity in the making. From dreams to direction. By the time he entered his teenage years, the dream had matured. He no longer simply wished for a better life, he began planning for one. While his friends spent weekends in idle leisure, he spent his time reading about entrepreneurship, innovation, and leadership. He was not yet successful. He had not yet built companies or earned millions. But he had done something far more important. He had cultivated the mindset of someone who believed success was possible. And that, dear audience, is the true beginning of every billionaire story. Not in the acquisition of wealth, not in the founding of empires, but in the simple, stubborn belief that my beginnings do not define my ending. So, what do we learn from these humble beginnings? Yet, circumstances are temporary, vision is eternal. Yi, curiosity opens doors that poverty cannot lock. Sam, adversity is not an enemy, it is a mentor. Say, the quiet promises we make to ourselves shape our destiny. This is how the journey begins, not with wealth, not with status, but with a child who refused to be defined by limitation. As we close this first chapter, remember this, every success story you admire today began in obscurity. The question is not whether you are starting from the bottom. The question is whether you are willing to believe that the bottom is simply a place to begin, not a place to remain.